Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Reimagining Dinosaurs Roundtable. My name is Emily Graslie. I'm going to be one of the moderators for this evening. You might know me from the YouTube series The Brain Scoop or PBS's Prehistoric Road Trip. I am delighted to be here and to be joined by my co-host, Dustin Growick.
Hello, everyone. Emily, I'm glad you also dressed up. I haven't been this excited for a Thursday night in a while.
Yeah.
No, it's great to be here. I should say I'm also a science communicator. I'm the host of Atlas Obscura's Dino 101 every Friday night. My job tonight is going to be assisting Emily with our tremendous panel, but perhaps more importantly, funneling your questions and comments to her and our panel for what, again, is going to be the most exciting Thursday night conversation ever. I'm going with ever. That's a high bar, but we're going to get
That is a high bar. So a little bit of context before we start to introduce all of our panelists and our other guests today. This roundtable was inspired by the October 2020 National Geographic feature of the same name, Reimagining Dinosaurs. You can still check it out online at natgeo.com/dinos. We'll also provide a link to it in the chat. It's really exciting to have National Geographic support for this. And in addition to that, we are joined by the author of that feature, Michael Greshko, who I'll get to in a moment. Before we do that, I want to encourage everybody to follow the Yale Peabody Museum on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and consider signing up for their mailing list, because I don't know if you know this, but the Peabody is rebuilding themselves for the first time in 100 years. This does not happen. They're undergoing a massive transformation. It's really exciting, and it's a fun thing to be a part of. So as Dustin said, we want to encourage everybody to ask questions throughout, and we will field those questions to our researchers. And now I want to turn it over to Michael.
Thank you so much, Emily. I am delighted to be here. And like you and Dustin, I've got some dinosaur. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a little tyrannosaur pattern on this shirt.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, so we're 3 for 3 so far. We'll see how it goes. I'm so honored and delighted to be participating in this with Emily and Dustin and our distinguished panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment. Reimagining Dinosaurs was a really exciting story to work on and kind of grew out of years of beat reporting I had done covering paleontology, including dinosaurs. And it was like the more I covered this field, the more I saw it as a field undergoing profound transitions. This is such an exciting time for paleontology as a whole, and the study of dinosaurs in particular. Researchers are finding more kinds of fossils all over the world and naming species at a pace of upwards of 40 to 50 new genus of dinosaur a year.
That's like one a week.
It's like one a week. Yeah.
That's a lot of dinosaurs.
It's a lot of dinosaurs. It's amazing. And then on top of that, researchers of all stripes around the world now have all sorts of amazing new techniques to study these fossils, not just the new ones, but the ones that have been with us for decades and sometimes centuries, revealing all sorts of new insights into how these amazing ancient creatures lived and evolved. And the third part of this, which I think is also really cool, exploring this story, is the human element. Not only what dinosaurs mean to us as sort of icons of evolution, movie monsters, these kind of cultural touchstones, but also thinking about all of the ways that paleontology today affects communities around the world in all sorts of interesting ways. To help us unpack all of this, we are joined by 3 amazing paleontologists here at Yale, whose work helped inform my story on this. We're going to go alphabetical by last name. So we're going to start with Anjan Bhullar, who is an assistant professor at Yale and an assistant curator at the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History. He studies these great transitions of vertebrate life through the fossil record and through some really innovative developmental biology techniques, and recently won a National Science Foundation career grant.
Exciting.
Thanks so much.
Congratulations.
Congrats, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Next, I want to introduce Matteo Fabbri, a paleontologist and PhD candidate at Yale and frequent collaborator of Bhullar's. Fabbri specializes in the study of the vertebrate brain and skull using the fossil record and developmental biology techniques. He also was part of a group that uncovered a very cool fossil in Morocco, which we will get to in great detail in this conversation. And last, I want to introduce Jasmina Wiemann, who is a molecular paleobiologist and PhD candidate at Yale. Jasmina has done fundamental work figuring out how biomolecules fossilize and can preserve information about ancient biology through deep time. So
cool.
I agree, Dustin.
It's so cool.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this webinar probably needs to be like 3 hours in order for us to get through as many of the things that I want to talk about that you just introduced. Unfortunately, we won't have 3 hours for that today. We have about an hour, but we want to address a couple of different themes that came up in Michael's Reimagining Dinosaurs as a way of looking at how paleontology has changed over the last 100 or 150 years, because we are at this moment in time at a starkly different place than we were when the Peabody Museum was first founded and opened. And to get into that, I think I want to start with one of the commonalities between then and now, because I think at times it can be difficult to know where those parallels are. But one thing that has persisted over the last 100 years as a theme of paleontology has been the aspect of field work. I mean, it's a critical component, kind of the first step before you have anything to write or publish about is you have to go and make those discoveries. And so to kick it off, I think the question that I want to field it specifically to Matteo, because I know he has feelings about this. Why is it important that we're still continuing to do field work today when there are so many discoveries of the past that we still haven't completely figured out yet?
First of all, thank you for having me here. When we think about the modern diversity of animals or plants, we can find an incredible array. Both ecologically and morphologically. However, when we think in deep time, what we see today is just a small percentage of what happened in the history of life in our planet. And the truth is that the majority of what happened already happened in the past. And therefore, when we think about modern times, the best thing to understand them is to look back in our past to understand how we arrive at what we see today. And fieldwork is exactly a way that paleontologists, like other scientists, try to tackle questions regarding our past to better understand our modern and current world.
So how has that changed? And this is a question for any of the panelists. How do you see what you're doing today as different in the approach or the technology? What is one of the things that sticks out to you as being fundamentally different now versus then?
Well, definitely technology has a big part on it. Like 100 years ago, we couldn't just sit down on our desk in front of our laptop and go in Google Maps to look for new sites or new places where to dig. This is very easy today. We can just Zoom with our colleagues on the other side of the planet and just figure out where we are gonna dig next time. Another thing that dramatically changed, in my opinion, is our perspective towards the fossil. Today, we know that molecular data are preserved, that bone is not only morphology, but inside the bone you can find, for example, growth record. Therefore, all this information must be taken into account when you are digging for new sites. Additionally, we know that new sites might determine new kinds of preservation. So really, when you are going into the field, you have to be expecting something that you can neither imagine. And this is how you make greatest discoveries. It's when you go in the field and you don't have any assumptions and you just look at the ground, and you will find something really special.
That's amazing. Matteo, do you want to talk about one of your incredibly special discoveries in field work? I think it's, I'll let you tell the story.
So one of the most important parts regarding fieldwork is to try to make an effort to go into places where no one else has been. And one of these places, surprisingly, is Africa. Africa is probably the richest country in the world in terms of resources, and it has an incredible fossil record. But when we look also from an historical perspective, we see that some countries like United States or Canada or Europe have been explored in depth. But when we go to Africa, basically everything you find is something new or something that is giving you a new tale of what happened in the past. And so in the last 10 years, I've participated in this international fieldwork program in the Northern Africa, specifically in the Sahara Desert, with a main focus in the Cretaceous rocks. And apart tons of bones that we discovered, definitely the most important and relevant find was the discovery of a new skeleton of Spinosaurus. This is a giant predatory dinosaur that was lost for almost a century because the only known skeleton was destroyed during the First World War and Second World War. And we had to wait 100 years before a new skeleton just appeared out of nowhere in Morocco. And so we digged all those bones, and we found out Spinosaurus was a pretty weird animal, very, very different from any other dinosaur that we knew before. And among all of the peculiarities of this animal is the fact that it was the first aquatic dinosaur, and it had some anatomical proportions and some other traits that definitely placed it in a more aquatic environment.
I mean, what I think is so exciting about that is, for one, no, I don't think most people think about aquatic environments for dinosaurs. But I want to bring it up to other panelists or to Michael too. Like, I don't want to take that discovery for granted. You know, like this is opening up a whole new way of interpreting what dinosaurs could do and their mobility. What are some of the other ways that this discovery challenged preconceptions of paleontology?
Yeah, so for a long time, we thought dinosaurs were mainly terrestrial. And so Spinosaurus was a breakthrough in terms of ecological diversification of these animals. Like we thought wild mammals were kind of more diversified in these terms. Dinosaurs were more restricted to land-dwelling environments. So Spinosaurus was a push forward towards this new idea of dinosaurs in their ecosystems. And it took a long time to go there, but I have to say that Spinosaurus is far from being the only exception to that. For example, we thought for a long time that birds were the only ones that were flying. And then in the last 20 years, from sites from China, we discovered many non-avian dinosaurs that are very similar, for example, to Velociraptor, that were capable of flight. Therefore, I mean, I want to support what was said before. We truly are in a revolutionary moment for paleontology, because we are seeing that all our assumptions that were built in the earliest discoveries are actually wrong. And now we are seeing a new expansion of the biology of these animals.
Michael, do you feel like that was reflected in your piece and reporting as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that makes Spinosaurus so fun is I mean, particularly in the last 7 years, just how much attention and debate has kind of come up around this interpretation. And I think that's a really fascinating aspect of paleontology, is that, I mean, we don't have the luxury of a time machine to go back to what is now Morocco, circa 95 to 97 million years ago. Bring our binoculars and see Spinosaurus in these river systems and see that for ourselves. We have to interpret that off the anatomy of this creature. And there is vigorous debate in the community still about whether it was this sort of croc-like sleek aquatic predator, as Matteo and his colleagues have interpreted. There are other views that maybe this is an animal that was like a very effective dino stork, kind of problem. We could spend an hour and a half at least kind of going through all of this. But I think that's such a fascinating piece. And to Matteo's other point, the more that we learn about the fossil record, the more complex our story of evolution becomes. We used to think that kind of birds and the bird line dinosaurs, like those closest cousins kind of on that branch of the theropod dinosaur family tree, were the dinosaurs that kind of figured out flight. We now have enough to say that flight independently arose within dinosaurs, or at least gliding, independently arose at least 3, if not 4 more times within the dinosaur record. There are some really fun and downright goofy looking dinosaurs from the mid-Jurassic China with these sort of membranous like wings. You could kind of analogize them to what you see in bats. They were not good flyers. They couldn't, power their own flight, but they were seen to be like gliding through the treetops. And so it kind of reflects this the experiment that evolution runs constantly, and how that yielded the dinosaurs we have today in the form of birds and all of the amazing fossil diversity we've seen.
Yeah, and Jasmina, I think this is a great question for you too. Your work isn't traditionally in the field. You're not looking at the morphological differences of skeletons or fossil skeletons that are found. So you're not using some of those same physical characteristics in your research. So can you talk a little bit about how you contribute to these discoveries in a really in a kind of exciting and new way?
Yeah, well, I guess, I'm taking it from here, from the field aspect of data generation to the lab aspect of data generation. Generally, all kinds of discoveries, like the big discoveries we've made in the past, are all tied to either finding new fossils in the field or generating new exciting data in the laboratory. And I think there is a really compelling aspect to combining evidence from both sides. And so most of my work is actually on the laboratory side of things, where we look specifically at organic matter that preserves associated with different types of fossils, with fossil eggshells, fossil bones, fossil teeth, other kinds of soft tissues that preserve not as rarely as people may think. And so based on that information, we can actually test lots of these hypotheses that were based on morphological data and field observations. And so I think it is a quite exciting moment in paleontology. We like to call it the molecular revolution of paleobiology, associated basically like with this expansion of looking more at the different isotope geochemical data, organic geochemical data that can be generated from fossils. And so, for example, just jumping on what Michael just pointed out, when we think about the evolution of, let's say, physiological strategies associated with the evolution of flight, these are things, there are obvious morphological aspects associated with flight, and like the specific physiology that's required to maintain some sort of metabolism that allows an animal to be so active and fly around. There is obvious morphological evidence preserved, but in some cases that's not really informative as to, whether an animal was able to actively fly or just to glide, like in the case of ET. Michael was talking about this. So with molecular data, we can really test for that. And I think that's a really exciting new opportunity to, not only complement morphological data, but critically interrogate them. Sort of like from the point of view as to where we're like, nowadays what we see in modern animals in terms of their physiological capabilities, that is not necessarily, as Matteo said, representative of, what was there in the past. And so, beyond just modeling sort of like from the present back into the past, we have now a tool to actively look at what was there in the past in terms of physiological innovation and other types of aspects that can be answered with molecular data.
I think that's so exciting because when you think about it from the perspective of history, somebody like O.C. Marsh, who was one of the most, prominent paleontologists of all time, could he even imagine? And I want to bring this to Dustin and to Michael. Like, could he? I mean, he couldn't have imagined the ways in which we would be using fossils that they collected over 100 years ago to be able to extrapolate information about animals that lived hundreds of millions of years ago from specimens that were collected 100 years ago before any of these technologies existed. So my question a little bit is, if we think into the future for this, just from a public perception side of things, where does this lead us? Like, what are some of the other exciting potentials or innovations that we might be able to see, or we're already seeing today?
Just to jump in to defend my predecessor a little bit, Marsh actually was one of the most meticulous collectors of fossils, and one of the few people who went around and said, get these little tiny things, every single piece of them, right? Which is how we discovered some of the early toothed stem birds. So he may have imagined some of this stuff, actually. Okay.
That's such a good question. I mean, we could talk about feathers, we could talk about eggshells, we could talk about colors, but I think Spinosaurus is a really good example of something that 20, 30 years ago, the idea of a Spinosaurus, something that we're not sure if it lived primarily in water or if on land, or if it was like a newt, or if it was like a stork, just that is making us reimagine how and where dinosaurs can live and how they can fit in to ancient ecosystems. And I love that because it brings up so many new questions. I'm just looking at the chat right now. People want to know, do we think Spinosaurus had feathers? Budding paleontologist age 10, Chris Reiner, wants to know, how do we know what Spinosaurus ate? And so I love these questions about an animal that really intrigues people, because it makes us get back to why we talk about, and personally, why I love dinosaurs in the first place. It's all about questions. And I think more than any other science, it really hammers home the fact that questions are more important than answers, because you guys know this, other than birds, dinosaurs aren't here anymore. So we can't just go and look at a Spinosaurus and study it. So we have to use the amazing research you guys are doing to try to piece together a puzzle of an animal and an ecosystem that are hundreds of millions of years in the past. And like Michael said, how is that going to inform us moving forward? Because people think of paleontology as a dead science, but I think tonight we've already proven that it's absolutely not. And I love that.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think one of the real fun things about looking into the fossil record is that our ability to use modern analogs breaks down. There's not a predator like Spinosaurus today, a more than 50-foot long, got its, a 6-foot tall sail on its back, and it's got this big old kind of crocodilian-like jaw and teeth.
It looks weird. You can say it.
It's weird. It's really weird.
It's weird.
And it's the more that we find of, and not Spinosaurus represents this, but it's not alone in this idea of, seeing a fossil and being like, who ordered that? I think about the therizinosaurs, which are these really big, had enormous long front claws, likely herbivorous. You had animals like Dinochirus, which was super weird. Just Google Dinochoeirus right now. Look at illustrate. This is a goofy dinosaur in the best possible way. And I think that's one of the fun things is, we have to understand these animals on their ecological terms. And in doing that, we learn really fundamental truths about the way life works. This is actually a good, kind of pivot into Anjan's work. He's when I found out about his research at a paleontology conference a few years ago, I was absolutely fascinated with the combination of fossil record and then like cutting edge molecular biology and developmental biology to kind of bridge this gap between past and present. So Anjan, for you, how do you think fossils can teach us about animals that are alive today and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, by the way, as far as dinosaurs being gone, right, there's like 20,000, between 50 and 20,000 species of living dinosaur, right? So that's a sort of lead into a different, I think, kind of perspective on these things, which is that when you're a biologist, which I fundamentally am, biologist, historian of life, you look around and you don't say, my God, we have so little left on Earth today, and everything that can tell us about how things came to be is gone, right? You don't see, it's not like there's a ladder, we've got the sort of crowning part of it and everything else has disappeared. Actually, I mean, we still have things like bacteria, right? We still, I mean, like the bacteria are most of life on Earth, right? We still have all of these branches of the tree of life from the last common ancestor. And if you look at extinction, what you actually see is like a pruning of this tree. So we've still got the vast majority of the genetic and morphological diversity of life kind of on the planet. And if you understand the ways in which the different branches are related, you can infer a great deal about the parts that have been sheared off, right? And so from that perspective, one thing that we often say to be funny, but also something that's formally true, is that all dinosaurs are basically what we call stem birds, right? They're the stem parts of the avian lineage. And then the other side of the major split of the ruling reptiles, the archosaurs, right, is the crocodilians, led to the crocodilians. There's a great diversity of stuff on there, including animals that ran and walked on two legs like dinosaurs, all kinds of other stuff that's gone now. But because we still have those two end members, we can do things like examine the commonalities between crocodilians and birds, which are many, actually, like many more than you would think, including both sing. Crocodilians sing in a very low voice, birds sing in a very high voice. They care for their young, they build nests out of plants, all of these things. And we can apply simple Enlightenment principle of parsimony and say, if those things are present in both of these end members, they were probably present in the common ancestor, and they were probably present in most of the descendants of that common ancestor. And so right away, just by learning about those two living groups, you can say a great deal about the basic behaviors and biology of dinosaurs. And
so Anjan, I just want a quick point of clarification. When we talk about birds and dinosaurs being, related to one another,
right.
when did we even learn this? Because I'm thinking about maybe the early paleontologists of the 20th century didn't dig up a raptor and automatically make that connection. So when was that discovery? When did that become more accepted within the scientific community?
So it's weird. There was a lot of clarity of thought, actually, that accompanied Darwin's initial great insights, right? And around Darwin, there were these towering figures like T.H. Huxley, and actually O.C. Marsh was an early adopter of evolutionary thought as well. And those people already saw enormous commonalities between the forms of dinosaurs, especially the forms of limbs and such, and forms of birds, and posited that, maybe at least something like a dinosaur was in fact the ancestor of all birds. And then that kind of thinking, it somehow became muddled with the sort of evolutionary thought that came in around the time of the World Wars, which was more focused on things like population genetics, right? Stuff where you're thinking about blobs making other blobs, and instead of this dichotomous branching tree. And it's a matter of perspective, right? You zoom in, it's always going to be more complicated than the larger scale picture. But I think the larger scale picture was lost to some extent until all of those thoughts were And all of those ideas were, in a way, rediscovered with some work done by one of my predecessors at Yale, John Ostrom, who discovered this animal, Deinonychus, which is, there was a brief period during which some people moved Deinonychus into the genus Velociraptor, and it was during that period that Jurassic Park was written. So the animal in Jurassic Park actually is Deinonychus, right? There's Deinonychus with a little Deinonychus. And the similarities between Deinonychus and birds, Archaeopteryx and Deinonychus, and so on, were so obvious and compelling that it led Ostrom to effectively resurrect or bring back into prominence the idea that birds didn't just come from a common stock with dinosaurs and crocodiles, but that birds are in fact living dinosaurs.
So how does that
all of the biology of dinosaurs is locked in the biology of birds, right?
Right. So I was going to, my next question for you is, how does that manifest in your own research and your own interpretation of the fossil record?
Yeah. So, I mean, so there are a couple of things that one can do, right? One of the things that we do is we look at the evolution of what are sometimes called soft tissues. When you think about a skeleton, obviously paleontologists spend a lot of their time thinking about skeletons. I think we can get to the point where we imagine like bones evolving to other bones. But bones, in fact, are actually just hardened parts of the connective tissue that grow late in development, in embryonic development. And all of the other tissues, the muscles, the nerves, et cetera, are already there. So we can learn a great deal. Right? That's an embryonic alligator tail, by the way, and those golden blocks are muscles. The green is nerves. The blue is just staining cell nuclei. It's an alligator embryo there. It actually looks at this stage like the embryo of most other land vertebrates. But the shapes of the bones can tell us a huge amount about the biology of the animals because they preserve the impressions of things like the brain and the ear, the muscles, all of these things that give these animals motive force and relate to their behavior, right? But also, when you look at something like a bird, right, this exquisite machine that's made for flying, you can just catalog all of these differences between that animal and a normal reptile, or even that animal and something like a carnivorous dinosaur like Tyrannosaurus. But all of those anatomical innovations have to appear at some point during development, because obviously things aren't just built during evolution. Animals have to be built anew every generation from a single cell, right, to the adult. And it turns out that as birds become birds in the egg, they actually go through a lot of stages that are very dinosaurian in their aspect. You know, they're burdened by their history.
I mean, I think that feeds into Jasmina's work too. And I want to open this to all of the panelists too, but how do you see your work as individual researchers coming together to essentially, this is collaborative work, right? I think we always get the idea that science happens in a silo, or we uphold the idea of a lone genius, making these discoveries on their own. But I think one of the greatest innovations in the last 100 years of paleontology, or science in general, is demonstrating how truly collaborative it is. So this is a question for any of the panelists. How do you see your work supporting the works of your colleagues to help bring some of these discoveries to light?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to answer that, generally, I absolutely agree. Like, science nowadays is, like, educationally, you specialize very early on into one, like, sort of like small portion of an analytical approach or of a particular concept. And so it is very difficult, for one person to be able to sort of like tackle all these different aspects that we need to answer these big picture questions. And so science is becoming really collaborative, really interdisciplinary. Paleontology as a fundamentally applied science of all the natural sciences is intrinsically interdisciplinary. And so, like, generally, I mean, I can speak now for the molecular paleobiology community. I'm sure Anjan and Matteo can add something for their subdisciplines as well. But so in our field, we totally depend on those people who do these exciting field works and collect these, different types of fossils that evidence some sort of particular feature that then inspires us to tackle a specific question with analytical methods, with molecular methods. And so going back to what Anjan mentioned earlier, if we think about modern biodiversity sort of like as a subsample of biodiversity in the past, of physiological innovation in the past, I think, basically combining expertises from geochemistry, from applied physics, from big data modeling to climate science with traditional paleontological evidence in the fossil record really allows us to answer what cannot exactly or not reliably be modeled down from the present branches. And so if we really want to get to these absolutely surprising and unexpected discoveries, such as dinosaur egg color that was featured in Michael's article, then it has to be disciplinary work and interdisciplinary work and collaborative work, and we really embrace that here.
Yeah, turns out Deinonychus is. Oh, sorry, Dustin. Go for it.
Jasmina, we need to know. You just mentioned egg color. That I want to know, and I know a lot of people in the chat want to know as well. How do we actually figure that out? What are we looking at? What are the tools you're using to figure out what color, for instance, Deinonychus eggs were?
Yeah, so that's an exciting question, and I'm very glad that people are curious about the analytical approach to it, which is really the hardcore science. So there are different ways to tackle which pigments were present in eggs. So if we look at modern birds are, as Anjan explained, dinosaurs, surviving dinosaurs, living dinosaurs. Most birds have colorful eggs, and it's really incredible what kind of color spread we get there. Yes, you can see it here in the photograph. We get these like bright blue emo eggs. We get these beautifully pink and blue speckled, they're corvid eggs here. We also get plain white eggs, for example, in alligators, as sort of like the outgroup to dinosaurs, including birds. This is a photograph from our ornithological collections. Yes, so there is really like a lot of diversity in terms of egg color in modern birds. All this diversity traces back to only 2 color pigments, and they are not inorganic pigments as you would think. So they are not mineral pigments. They are like organic molecular pigments that in structure resemble very much the compounds that also stain our blood in red. So they are very closely related to heme, which is like the red compound in our blood. They're called porphyrin pigments. And so we have these linear and cyclic porphyrins. There's a blue pigment and there's a red pigment. And so we can either use very sensitive sort of like molecular scales to target specifically the presence of these pigments in modern bird eggshells and dinosaur eggshells, or we can use one of my absolutely favorite methods, which is non-destructive, which makes it even better for dealing with fossil materials that all represent unique evidence of past life, which is called in situ Raman microspectroscopy. And so with Raman microspectroscopy, we can basically get like a molecular fingerprint, look at our different types of fossils and check if this molecular fingerprint associated with the red pigment and the blue pigment is present. And so, when we look at sort of like modern crocodiles and modern birds, and imagine the dinosaurs go somewhere in between. We have egg color in modern birds. We have no egg color pigments in crocodiles. So what was there ancestrally? Who knows? And so actually our work with organic geochemistry and amazing collaborators from the American Museum of Natural History who do this exciting field work, who curate these really impressive collections, has led us to infer that dinosaurs laid colorful eggs, not all of them, just some of them, the carnivorous ones that are more bird-like. But yeah, so like these surprises and these like unexpected discoveries, they really come from collaborative work, from like a globalized idea of paleontology as a research subject.
Amazing.
While we're on these questions from the chat, these are great. You just mentioned the breadth at which we study paleontology across the world. I know there's been a lot of really cool findings the last couple decades in China, in Africa, as well as in Patagonia. If you guys had to, I'm curious to know, where's the next dino frontier? Where do we think we're going to start finding some really cool stuff over the next 10, 15 years?
in the folds.
In the folds.
But yeah, definitely in the folds, like Antarctica and so on. Like those are the places.
What do you mean? What do you mean when you say in the folds?
No, poles.
The poles.
Yeah,
oh,
sorry.
I was like folds, like tectonic folding.
No. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that was
sorry the accent. No, definitely in the poles. And so those places are basically not explored as much as they should be. I am also a lover of Gondwana, so like Africa, South America, Australia, India. All these places have still a lot to give. This because historically a paleontological tradition was more typical for Europe and then North America. It is only now that in the last 20, 30 years, this science really spread in the southern continents, and we are realizing that our picture that was based on Eurasia was completely wrong. So there is a lot to come. Like one is Spinosaurus, but all the early dinosaurs are coming from Gondwana, for example. So I think that is the place to look for.
I think there's a sort of archaic dinosaurian fauna that existed at the end of the Triassic that included things like this little heron-like animal Coelophysis, and also some of the earlier ancestors of the giant sauropods, right? And that's almost a global fauna because Pangea was still a thing. Everything was conglomerated into one enormous continent. And then in the late Jurassic, so that's the Triassic to early Jurassic, and the late Jurassic, of course, it was like the heyday of the behemoths, right? I mean, everything was already there, including things like Archaeopteryx. In between those 2 points, in the middle parts of the Jurassic, there's relatively little information. There's some basins in China. There's actually a little bit in England. There's potentially stuff in the southwestern United States, although all the terrestrial stuff out there that's been explored, which is comparatively not that much, has been relatively afossiliferous. But I think that time period, which essentially captures the rise to dominance of dinosaurs, because before they were vying with the croc line, is still an extremely important part of the story that we need to fill in.
How long is that chunk of time? Like how many millions of years are you talking about there, where we don't have a very complete fossil record?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the dates that you like, but it's at least 20, 40 million years, that there's a pretty big gap with very little there. There's some early Jurassic sites that may actually be somewhat younger than we think, so it might be pushed toward the later period. But it's possible, things sometimes don't happen gradually, right? Things sometimes happen in a very rapid way, either because of some external force or just because of contingency. And so there might be just a transition that's very quick.
Yeah, and on that point too, I mean, I just think about this in the context of the sauropodomorphs, the bigger group that contains kind of the classic long-necked dinosaurs we've all come to see. One of the things that really struck me in recent years is just like the classic sort of sauropod long-necked dinosaur body plan. Like there's a certain checklist that by the late Jurassic sauropods achieve. These column-like legs, like underneath the body, different aspects of like the hips and things. And the more that work and material from the late Triassic to the early to mid-Jurassic kind of fills in this picture, a lot of, there were animals that got pretty big that didn't have all of this toolkit together. I think about Ingentia prima from Patagonia, or Lingwulong, a site from China, demonstrating that the biggest of the big dinosaurs, that group, the sauropods, got bigger sooner in a more complex way than we originally knew. To circle back to Jasmina's point about collaboration, I think one of the most amazing things about modern paleontology is how CT scanning in particular has really unlocked kind of like a data sharing revolution when it comes to fossil material. I mean, we live in a day and age now where you can email someone a skeleton Like, that's a thing. You can do that. And I mean, the prospect of that, particularly with high resolution scans that reveal kind of inner parts of the anatomy you wouldn't otherwise be able to see, has really enabled this science to do new things at a global scale heretofore considered impossible.
Hey, that's amazing. So we have about 13 minutes left in our panel today. And again, it could go on for another 3 hours or so if we wanted. And on that note, Michael, when we think about like paleontology, we have all these different factors now. You can get these exciting molecular discoveries. We are, bridging that gap between birds and dinosaurs and being able to make phenomenal inferences about these extinct animals from that information. And then we have these areas where we know that the fossil record hasn't been as well studied. So when we think about the future of paleontology, the next 5 to 10 to 50 years, where do you all see this going? Where do we go from here? What does it mean to reimagine dinosaurs 50 years from now, based on where we are today?
I just want to jump in real quick and also partially answer one of the questions from the chat. So it was originally a question about biomolecule preservation and how much of a protein we can actually recover, right? Whether we can actually get some sort of at least amino acid sequence. And Jasmina should answer that part. But I think where that's leading is to the question of to what extent we can reconstruct the genetic architecture of something like an extinct non-avian dinosaur, right? There's a way that doesn't involve John Hammond going into the amber mine and a way that doesn't involve fossils at all, right? Because genome sequencing technology has evolved to the point that it has. We now have full sequences of crocodilians on the one hand and birds on the other, a bunch of different birds. And they're substantially similar, right? The difference is all of the things that go into making a dinosaur, making a bird, but also making a dinosaur, are locked in a few alterations of protein coding sequences, of control regions in the DNA. And we technically have the ability right this second to go in, take those sequences and computationally infer the probable sequence of many of the genes and the regulatory regions of the common ancestor. Oh, that's an experiment we did where we turned a bird's beak, get back into a dinosaurian snout. First time birds had a dinosaurian snout in about 65 million years, so that was cool. But
that's amazing.
That was not through genetic alteration. That was through upstream stuff, alteration of the proteins. But now that we didn't have the genomes when I did that work, but now we have the genomes themselves. And so we could actually make or reconstruct and have in a computer file effectively the reconstructed genome of the common ancestor of crocs and dinosaurs, which looked like a dinosaur. And then we could bump it up and say, like, okay, add this many million years of evolution toward the bird side and sort of reconstruct also those intermediate forms, which means that we could have a pretty good idea of what something like a velociraptor genome might have looked like in various ways. Okay, so think about that. The technology we don't have yet is the technology to de novo build entire genomes. It's hard enough to just build a small string of DNA, never mind to string it over chromosomes and stuff. But that tech will come, right?
It's
and
amazing.
Then there's shortcuts like gene editing, which is rather hard with birds, but that also exist. Just a note. I mean, we study evolutionary transitions. We're not in the business of making dinosaurs.
Right. Jasmina, I know you have feelings about this.
I do. And I mean, Anja and Matteo, that, I'm totally mind blown by the work that you're doing there in the lab, sort of recreating different types of extinct morphologies, by modeling evolution. But I think, we should not underestimate the kind of information that goes back to Emily's question originally, the kind of information that we can now get from the fossil record, which is a lot more than we thought, we dreamed of about 10 years ago. And so, you were talking about the John Hammond approach of, taking the mosquito in the amber and basically obtaining phylogenetically so interrelationship related information. And obviously we cannot just like we're working sort of like in that area, like there's no DNA preserved in
Sounds
really
like I'm
old
gonna
fossils.
have to eat my words, possibly.
There is no DNA preserved in these really old fossils, at least based on our data, and we use in situ methods, so we don't alter anything, and we should see if there is something present or not. We do not find the preservation of original proteins, but what we observe really, really commonly, and not only in geologically younger fossils, like dinosaur fossils from the Mesozoic, but even in like really, really old trace fossils back to the late Neoproterozoic, so we're talking like 550 million years ago in terms of aging, is the preservation of organic matter that has been chemically altered in time, but represents actual biomolecule fossilization products. And so we can now use different types of statistical and chemical tools. Again, it's very collaborative. We integrate these different approaches, and we can, within, at the moment, this is really, like emerging research that is like broadening and developing in terms of what we can actually do. We can obtain information that is informative about relationships based on specific protein fossilization products that preserve in very altered ways, not in form of proteins anymore, relationship information that would otherwise in living animal be contained in the amino acid sequence. So the little building blocks, individual building blocks of a protein. And so when we look, for example, back again, like from the present to the past, and we would want to understand how are the three main branches of dinosaurs related. There was a huge controversy recently with very exciting new data, I think, and it's totally a conversation to be had in our scientific community. If we want to answer questions like that, where morphology, like what we have preserved in terms of bone shapes and other kinds of hard tissue evidence, where that is a little bit ambiguous, we can use this molecular information to tease apart heterogeneities and get actually a more unambiguous idea of how these clades were related, where we can't just infer it back from the present. And yeah, so I guess, like I'm adding here like the complementary view to what these guys are doing in the lab. There is a lot of potential in the future. We get all kinds of biological signatures preserved in the fossil record related to biomineralization of, we've recently published this for dinosaur eggshells, related to what kinds of tissues can actually fossilize. And so I think there is to physiological traits such as the metabolism of extinct animals, something we never thought we could ever know. So, and relationship information. And so I think that some of the most exciting discoveries in the future, and here I'm giving a little twist, may actually come from collections. Collections are so incredibly important when it comes to exploring these new kinds of data, because you can collect, like a subset of informative materials during one fieldwork. But if you really start to explore, like, one potential avenue of science, in this case, geochemical data, like a collection is an invaluable resource. And so I really think that it's going to be collections that will be one of the prime targets for major discoveries in the future. Yeah.
That's a great segue to a question I want to know, and I know we have some young budding paleontologists listening right now. If we're talking about the future of dinosaurs and actually reimagining dinosaurs, how do they get involved in that over the course of the next 20 years or so? I will throw that, I guess, Michael, Anjan, Matteo, anyone who, it's a big question, but we got some paleontologists, young ones that want to get involved. How do they do it?
Man, with CT data, right? Yeah, Matteo, I mean, it won't be long before we can have entire data sets easily transferable.
Yeah, definitely. Also adding to what Anjan was saying, the other game changer is that using neontological data today is much easier than before, because for 30 years, 100 years, we were using just model organisms. Yeah. Now we are using also non-model organisms, and this means that we can actually tackle the question how certain anatomical traits and innovation that are relevant to understand evolution are appearing. And the fact that we use non-model organisms is definitely amplifying our range and our vision in understanding evolutionary processes. And of
That's
course,
amazing, Matteo.
yeah.
We only have 3 minutes left, so I want to get back to our audience question. So to wrap it up, we can't think about reimagining dinosaurs without thinking about the next generation of paleontologists. And so I'm going to throw this to Michael and then to Dustin. From the public side of things, I think an entry point into science communication and helping others get excited about it is the first step in building up those future paleontologists. So for, how do we get more people involved? What is the pathway into this field?
Well, I think one really important step is to think about this in a global context. I think one of the most exciting things about modern paleontology is that it is a truly global science. I mean, there was a time where fieldwork was a much more extractive enterprise, where fossils were collected and removed from a country, a province, a locality, and people couldn't easily see and recognize and celebrate their local natural heritage. We're now, I think, moving to a place where the science is truly more collaborative in a global sense. The Spinosaurus fossils that Matteo helped collect, for instance, are in Morocco at a collection in Casablanca that hopefully will help to seed a future Moroccan Museum of Natural History. So I think that's a really important piece of this, which is that as the science becomes a truly global endeavor, as it has, it will give more people more ways to see paleontology and dinosaurs where they are, around them.
I love that idea. What about you, Dustin? If people can't make it to Morocco, or if they can't make it to Wyoming to be a part of those digs, what are some of the ways that you see getting the next generation of paleontologists and dinosaur lovers involved in this field?
I see 2 major ways. One, send a message to the people who are talking right now. Like, we're at a point where you can tweet to them. You can send them a message on Facebook. We love this stuff. We love studying dinosaurs, and you do too. Let's nerd out together. You would be surprised as how receptive paleontologists are to answering your questions that we didn't get to in the chat, or whatever you want to talk about. That's number one. Number two, to bring it all the way back, we are part of a Yale Peabody Museum panel. Go to your local museum. Museums are treasure troves holding millions of years of art, history, science, and culture, and going there and participating in programs and meeting people that are in the field, that's simply the first step. Being like in the conversation, and there are so many ways to do it, is literally the first step. And who knows how your dinosaur journey is going to go after that. It could end up on a panel like this. We don't even know. On that same note, you guys, please follow on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Yale Peabody Museum. If you want more information about programs like this, peabody.yale.edu. I can't wait to do another one of these. Emily, what have we forgotten? How do we say bye when I know we just want to keep talking about this?
I don't know. I think one great way, if we want to continue the conversation, absolutely. Follow the Peabody. All of these researchers today, you can find that everybody on this panel is on Twitter. So we all have our own social media. I won't have time to read off everybody's individual handles, but yeah, you can find us all online. And I just want to make this extension invitation to anybody. Please, reach out to paleontologists, whether the ones on the panel or others at your local universities or museums. We're here to build relationships with the public, whether virtually or when we can be here in person again. So on that note, I just want to take a minute to just thank the panelists, thank Dustin and Michael for being here. Thank you to the Yale Peabody Museum. This is so exciting. And thank you all for coming and bringing your wonderful questions. I wish we had 2.5 more hours for this, but we won't. But you will be able to stream this online later. And we look forward to seeing you at future programs hosted by the Peabody. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.